Hello there, kia ora. There's been a lot of chat lately about rates caps, from local body candidates to the Taxpayers Union and the Minister for Local Government, and like a lot of suggestions from these groups, it sounds catchy. It creates a perception of an easy to achieve short term goal, and it's eventually going to screw over councils and communities by tying their hands and removing their ability to do anything else before giving even more firepower to politicians to criticise local government. Yeah, just like the anti three water plans did.
We have the system, and yet I think it would be fair to say that there was no institution anywhere in New Zealand that worked to stop that more than groundswell.
Oh, no, I would disagree with that.
Here, let me explain. We all know that rates rises are a pain. No one is denying that. And this government and their proxies have done a really good job of making out like the reason for those increases are for vanity projects, nice to haves, well-being contingencies and, bike lanes and speed bumps. The reality is that the vast majority of council expenditure goes on core essentials. Depending on the council, it's between 85 and 98% of total expenditure, and every council has had to deal with increased costs on that core infrastructure. Concrete, for example, which is in most infrastructure projects, that's gone up 60% over the past 6 years. Bitumen, which goes into almost every roading project, that's gone up about 25%. Steel rebar, which goes into your bridges and your buildings, well, that's gone up 161% in the last 6 years. And that's just the materials before labour costs. Add into the mix other issues like the return of water infrastructure onto council books with no immediate plan on how to deal with them, or the financial burden that they bring. Years of artificially depressed rates by putting off infrastructure projects and upgrades and cutting services to save costs. The removal of funding for transport upgrades from Waka Kotahi, along with service cuts and limited tools for council revenue gathering, and you end up with the situation that a lot of our councils are currently finding themselves in, while also dealing with a growing population with increased needs that have to be met. Of those limited tools, rates plays two really big parts. It's the largest revenue stream, the one that council controls the most, but it also shows the local government funding organisation that councils can raise the revenue to pay for loans used for multi-generational projects that need to be funded to meet the needs for these growing communities. So a rates cap automatically limits any council's ability to raise enough revenue to fund future development. That's future roads, libraries, museums, parks, bridges, water infrastructure, subdivision requirements. On top of that, because the tools for alternative revenue gathering are so limited, well, they're going to be increased exponentially to meet rising costs because, costs seldom go backwards. This means increased fees for things like public transport, dog registration, rubbish collection, food safety, alcohol licensing, swimming pools, libraries, museums, and some fines. Some are set by central government. Oh, and development contributions, which will mean a decrease in future building and development. The areas that deal with the growing population, where they live, and what they do. And because any increase in service prices will lead to a decrease in usage, well, that then means it becomes less financially viable to continue owning or funding these facilities and services long term for councils. So the options are going to be either to cut them entirely or to privatise through either asset sales or private public partnerships. All of the costs of core infrastructure and services continue to rise well above the rate of consumer inflation, which they've done for the past decade. And any politicians who try and claim that rates should be based on CPI should know that that's a fallacy of an argument, since rates are part of what makes up CPI. It's why the Prime Minister blamed frickin' councils on the frickin' rise in the CPI this week and, didn't take responsibility for any of it himself. All meaning an ongoing cycle of underfunding, inability to correct issues, a loss of service and infrastructure, and the government complaining that cycle lanes and accessible toilets, all of which cost less than a percentage of total expenditure for most councils, well, they're all to blame. When the reality is that as frustrating as rates rises are, they're a necessary step to continue to provide the basics to our communities, make up for years of underinvestment to keep rates artificially lower, and a marker to help future growth is met with necessary tools and infrastructure to ensure that we can handle that growth without anyone missing out. But rates cap now is a really catchy phrase that some idiots seem to keep falling for over and over.
Hey,
thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.